3 women, 3 alleyways, 3 nights. The first victim was Dorothy Hayes, 28 years old, singer at a jazz club on Lenox Avenue, found strangled in an alley behind the club on March 3, 1959. Her body discovered at 6:20 a.m. by a delivery driver. The second was Regina Thompson, 31, seamstress, strangled in an alley off 132nd Street on March 10th, found at dawn by a shop owner opening his store. The third was Patricia Moore, 26, nurse at Harlem Hospital, strangled in an alley near St. Nicholas Avenue on March 17th, her body found at sunrise. 3 women, all killed the same way, hands around the throat, bruising consistent with manual strangulation, no robbery, no assault beyond the killing itself, just murder. The NYPD assigned 2 detectives to the case. They conducted interviews, took statements, filed reports, and did nothing. Because in 1959, 3 dead black women in Harlem didn't warrant the same attention as 3 dead white women in Manhattan. The investigation stalled. The detectives moved on to other cases, but Harlem didn't forget. And when the police wouldn't act, someone else did. On March 20th, 1959, Bumpy Johnson called a meeting with every person who'd been near those 3 alleyways on those 3 nights. By March 21st, he had a name. By March 22nd, he had the man. And on March 23rd, the Strangler learned what it felt like to spend 3 days dying in the dark. March 20th, 1959, 8 p.m. Bumpy's office above Small's Paradise was packed with 40 people. Bartenders, waiters, shop owners, street vendors, cab drivers, anyone who worked nights in Harlem, anyone who might have seen something. Bumpy stood at the front of the room. 3 women are dead, he said quietly. Dorothy Hayes, Regina Thompson, Patricia Moore, all of them strangled in alleyways, all of them killed at night, all of them our neighbors, our community. The room was silent. The police aren't doing anything, so we are. Someone in this room saw something. Someone saw a man in an alley. Someone saw someone running. Someone saw something that didn't feel right. Bumpy looked around the room. I need you to think. Go back to those nights. What did you see? For 2 hours, people talked, shared observations, small details that seemed meaningless alone, but together started forming a pattern. A cab driver remembered picking up a white man near 132nd Street at 2 a.m. on March 10th. His hands were shaking. He seemed nervous. A bartender remembered a man sitting alone at his bar on the night of March 3rd, white, mid-30s, drinking heavily, left around midnight. A shop owner remembered seeing a man lurking near the alley where Patricia Moore was found 2 days before she died, just standing there, watching. By 10 p.m., Illinois Gordon had compiled the descriptions. White male, mid-30s, dark hair, average height, wore work clothes, possibly a maintenance worker or laborer. Someone who blends in, Illinois said. Someone who works in the neighborhood. Someone people see but don't really notice. Start with maintenance companies, building supers, janitors, anyone who works late shifts and has access to alleys. It took 18 hours. By March 21st at 4 p.m., Illinois had a name. Robert Kavanaugh. 34 years old, building maintenance worker, lived in a rooming house on 145th Street, worked for a company that serviced buildings throughout Harlem. Illinois showed his photograph to the witnesses. The cab driver identified him immediately. That's him. That's the guy I picked up on March 10th. The bartender nodded. He was in my bar on March 3rd. I remember because he was the only white guy there that night. The shop owner confirmed it. That's the man I saw near the alley. I'm sure of it. Bumpy looked at the photograph for a long moment. Where is he now? At work. He's got a night shift at a building on 128th Street. Doesn't start until 11 p.m. Bumpy checked his watch. 4:17 p.m. We wait until he's alone. Then we take him. 11:34 p.m. Robert Kavanaugh walked out of the maintenance room in the basement of a residential building on 128th Street. He'd just finished his shift, cleaning, mopping, hauling trash. The building was quiet, everyone asleep, just him and the night. Kavanaugh walked toward the service exit, a metal door that led to an alley behind the building. He pushed it open. Willie Lee was waiting on the other side. Before Kavanaugh could react, Willie hit him, hard, across the jaw. Kavanaugh stumbled backward into the building. Marcus Cole was there, grabbed Kavanaugh's arms, twisted them behind his back. "What the hell?" Willie hit him again, this time in the stomach. Kavanaugh doubled over, gasping. They dragged him back through the basement, down a hallway to the sub-basement, a level below ground that most people didn't know existed. The elevator descended. The doors opened. The sub-basement was dark, cold. Pipes ran along the ceiling. The air smelled like mold and old concrete. And standing in the center of the space was Bumpy Johnson. Willie and Marcus threw Kavanaugh to the floor. He looked up, saw Bumpy, saw 4 other men standing behind him. "Robert Kavanaugh," Bumpy said quietly, "you killed 3 women. Dorothy Hayes, Regina Thompson, Patricia Moore. You strangled them in alleyways, left their bodies like garbage." Kavanaugh's face went pale. "I don't know what you're—" "Yes, you do. We have witnesses. We have evidence. We know it was you." Kavanaugh tried to stand. Willie kicked him back down. "I want a lawyer," Kavanaugh said. "You can't just—" "The police had their chance. They did nothing, so now you answer to us." Bumpy gestured to Willie and Marcus. "Tying up." They pulled out rope, thick, industrial, the kind used for mooring boats. They wrapped it around Kavanaugh's wrists, pulled it tight until the rope cut into his skin, tied his hands behind its back. Then they wrapped rope around his ankles, pulled his legs together, tied them so tight he couldn't move. Kavanaugh was struggling now. "Please, you're making a mistake. I didn't—" Marcus stuffed a rag in his mouth, tied another rag around his head to hold it in place. Now Kavanaugh couldn't speak, could barely breathe through his nose. Bumpy crouched down next to him. "You killed 3 women, 3 separate nights. You strangled them, watched them die, felt them stop breathing under your hands." Bumpy's voice was calm, cold. Dorothy Hayes was a singer. She had a voice that made people cry. Regina Thompson was a seamstress. She made wedding dresses for brides who couldn't afford them. Patricia Moore was a nurse. She saved lives. Bumpy stood up. "And you took them because you could, because they were alone in alleys, because you thought nobody would care." He walked toward the door. "You were wrong." Bumpy looked back at Kavanaugh one last time. "You killed 3 women, so you're going to spend 3 days down here, tied, in the dark, thinking about what you did." "Boss," Illinois said quietly, 3 days with no water, no food? He'll live, barely, but he'll live long enough to understand what those women felt in their last moments." Bumpy turned to Willie and Marcus. "Cut him, not deep, just enough to bleed." Willie pulled out a knife, made 3 cuts, one on Kavanaugh's arm, one on his leg, one across his shoulder. Not life-threatening, just painful and bleeding. Kavanaugh's eyes went wide with terror. He tried to scream through the gag, but only muffled sounds came out. 3 cuts for 3 women, Bumpy said. "You'll bleed slow. You'll feel pain. You'll feel weak, and you'll understand what it's like to be helpless." Bumpy walked toward the elevator. "Nobody comes down here for 3 days. Nobody checks on him. Nobody brings water. Nobody helps him." The 6 men followed Bumpy into the elevator. The doors closed. The sub-basement went dark. And Robert Kavanaugh was alone. Day 1, March 22nd. The first 12 hours were panic. Kavanaugh thrashed against the ropes, tried to loosen them, tried to break free, but the knots were professional, military grade. Every movement just made them tighter. His wrists were bleeding where the rope cut into his skin. His ankles were numb from lack of circulation. The cuts Willie had made were bleeding slowly, not enough to kill him quickly, just enough to weaken him. The gag in his mouth made breathing difficult. His throat was dry. He couldn't swallow properly. And the darkness was absolute. No windows in the sub-basement, no light, just black. Kavanaugh couldn't see his own hands, couldn't see the walls, couldn't see anything. After 12 hours, the panic turned to exhaustion. He stopped struggling, just lay there on the cold concrete floor, breathing, hurting. His mind started playing tricks. He heard sounds that weren't there, footsteps, voices, rats scratching in the walls. He saw lights that didn't exist, flashes, shadows moving in the darkness. And he thought about the women. Dorothy Hayes, singing in that alley before he grabbed her. The way she'd tried to scream but couldn't because his hands were around her throat. Regina Thompson, walking home alone. The way she'd fought, clawed at his hands, kicked, but he'd been stronger. Patricia Moore, the nurse. She'd begged, actually begged for her life. Told him she had patients who needed her, families who depended on her. He'd killed her anyway. And now, lying in the dark, bleeding, Kavanaugh understood something. This was what they'd felt. The helplessness, the fear, the knowledge that nobody was coming to save them. Day 2, March 23rd. Thirst. That was all Kavanaugh could think about by the second day. His mouth was so dry his tongue felt like leather. His throat was raw from trying to swallow with the gag in place. The cuts had stopped bleeding. Dried blood crusted on his skin, but his body was weak from blood loss. His muscles were cramping from being in the same position for over 30 hours. His wrists and ankles were swollen. The ropes had cut deep grooves into his flesh, and the darkness was making him insane. He couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed, couldn't tell if he was awake or dreaming. He hallucinated. Saw Dorothy Hayes standing over him, her face blue, her eyes bulging, her hands reaching for his throat. Saw Regina Thompson sitting in the corner, watching him, silent. Saw Patricia Moore kneeling beside him, whispering, "Now you know, now you understand." Kavanaugh tried to scream, but the gag turned it into a muffled whimper. He was alone in the dark with the ghosts of the women he'd killed, and they weren't leaving. Day 3, March 24th. By the third day, Kavanaugh was barely conscious. Dehydration had set in. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His skin was gray. His eyes were sunken. He'd stopped hallucinating, stopped thinking. His mind had shut down to conserve what little energy he had left. He just lay there, breathing, barely, waiting. For death, for rescue, for anything. At 8 p.m. on the third day, the elevator descended. The doors opened. Light flooded the sub-basement. Kavanaugh's eyes couldn't adjust. The light was blinding after 3 days of darkness. He heard footsteps, voices. Hands grabbed him, untied the ropes, pulled the gag from his mouth. Kavanaugh gasped, tried to speak. No words came out, just a dry, rasping sound. Someone held a bottle of water to his lips. He drank, choked, drank more. Slowly, his vision cleared. Bumpy Johnson was standing over him. 3 days, Bumpy said quietly. You survived, barely. Kavanaugh tried to respond, but his voice was gone. Dorothy Hayes died in 4 minutes. Regina Thompson in 6. Patricia Moore fought for 8 minutes before you finally killed her. Bumpy crouched down. You spent 3 days down here. 72 hours. That's over 4,000 minutes. And every single one of those minutes you felt what they felt. Fear, pain, helplessness. Bumpy stood. Now you're going to the police. We're turning you in. You're going to confess to all 3 murders. You're going to tell them exactly what you did. Kavanaugh shook his head weakly. I can't. Yes, you can. Because if you don't, we bring you back here. And next time, we don't come back after 3 days. Willie and Marcus pulled Kavanaugh to his feet. He could barely stand. His legs gave out twice. They half-carried, half-dragged him to the elevator. 9:30 p.m. The 28th Precinct Police Station. 2 police officers were at the front desk when the door opened. Robert Kavanaugh stumbled in, barely standing, covered in dried blood, dehydrated, beaten. Behind him, Illinois Gordon stood in the doorway, watching. Kavanaugh collapsed against the desk. I killed them," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "Dorothy Hayes, Regina Thompson, Patricia Moore. I killed all 3. The officers stared at him. I strangled them. In alleys. I confess. I did it." One officer reached for handcuffs. The other picked up the phone to call detectives. Illinois turned and walked out of the station. By the time the detectives arrived, Robert Kavanaugh had given a full confession. Every detail, every victim, every location. He was arrested, charged with 3 counts of murder, held without bail. At his trial 6 months later, he pleaded guilty, sentenced to life in prison. Robert Kavanaugh spent the next 23 years in Attica Correctional Facility. He died in 1982, 57 years old, heart attack. But people who knew him in prison said he was never the same after his arrest. Said he had nightmares, would wake up screaming, thrashing against restraints that weren't there. Said he talked to himself, apologized to women who weren't there, begged forgiveness from ghosts only he could see. The other inmates called him crazy, but Kavanaugh knew the truth. He'd spent 3 days in a basement, tied, bleeding, in the dark, and those 3 days broke something in him that never healed. Dorothy Hayes was buried on March 8, 1959, Regina Thompson on March 13th, Patricia Moore on March 20th. At each funeral, Bumpy Johnson stood in the back, silent, watching. After Patricia's service, her mother approached him. "Mr. Johnson," she said quietly, "they caught him, the man who killed my daughter." "Yes, ma'am." "The police said he confessed, just walked into the station and confessed." Bumpy didn't respond. Did you have something to do with that?" Bumpy looked at her for a long moment. "Your daughter deserved justice. The police weren't giving it to her, so someone had to." Patricia's mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." She walked away. Bumpy stayed until the cemetery was empty. Then he drove back to Harlem, to the streets where 3 women had been killed, to the community that had demanded justice when the system failed. The story spread through Harlem like wildfire. A strangler killed 3 women. The police did nothing. Bumpy Johnson found him, tied him up in a basement for 3 days, made him confess. The message was clear. The law might not protect Harlem's women, but Bumpy Johnson would. And anyone who thought they could kill in Harlem without consequences learned different. 3 women, 3 days, 3 cuts. Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms. Sometimes it comes from a basement in the dark, where killers learn what their victims felt, where 3 days feels like forever, where monsters become prey.